Welcome to Alignment, aligning voices and stories across the state of Wisconsin. My name is Dasha Kelly Hamilton, and I am the State Poet Laureate. And we're going to connect these different narratives, these different ideas, these different zip codes, all with a single line of poetry. Every month we'll have a different poetry line, and we'll find out what some different guests who don't know that they're neighbors, or maybe they do, will find out how well we know each other, and we get a chance to know each other a little bit better. Again, just getting our feedback and our ideas off of someone else's never random assembly of lines. That's what poems are, an assembly of language. And today we are looking at, and the city clears its throat. And the city clears its throat. A beautiful line of poetry, and I'll share the poem and the poet at the end of the program. But the invitation is to ask two residents, two neighbors, two souls of our state, what the line means to them. So our first guest making their way to our screen stage is Kristina Gomez. How are you?
Hi, Dasha. I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I appreciate you making time for this conversation, especially for not at all a guessing game, because it doesn't matter whether or not we know where the poem comes from, but what language is able to do. Hopefully it brought you to a story or brought you to a bit of wisdom. Before we get to what your ideas are about this poem and these words, give us a little bit of idea about who you are. Tell us who you are and where you're from.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So I'm originally from Racine, Wisconsin. I mentioned I'm the unlikely product of a meeting of two people, one from the middle of essentially nowhere, Mexico, who made his way to Wisconsin, and then my mother, who is originally from Racine. So an unlikely meeting between the two of them, and here I am. So it's a little bit of my background. I've been in Milwaukee for about 10 years now, and I am a librarian at Milwaukee Public Library, which is how I originally got to meet you. So very happy to be here.
Glad to have you here. Oh my goodness, the unlikely relationships are the ones that go down in the history books. My husband found a placard that we have hanging downstairs that says, and because two people fell in love.
Yeah.
Just all of the stories that start with that, all of the humans that start with that. So shout out to your parents for deciding to make a go at it all the way.
Thank you.
So tell me about being a librarian. So did that sneak up on you, or was that something that you knew you were going to do?
Yeah, it definitely snuck up on me. I in no way imagined myself being a librarian as a child. It wasn't, a dream that I held from when I was little, but I always knew about the library. Like, we did visit the library when I was a kid. I thought of it more as almost like the community center, as like a place to go and, do activities. And I had a family member who used English language learning classes that were offered at the library. So that was my impression of it. So it didn't really resonate as a profession until I was older, after I graduated from college, and I met some librarians and I actually talked to them and realized, like, hey, this actually fits in with what I want to do with my life in terms of serving the community. Yeah. And just like the connection I feel to stories, books, and people. And it kind of brings all those things together.
Wow. What did you study in school?
So for undergrad, I was an English literature major. So I thought I was going to stay in academia, but it totally was not for me. Like, my laugh is too loud, I think.
The librarian says her life is too loud. So to be on the other side of that, where you're more than likely creating that same experience for other little Kristinas who are in the library, and for the various reasons that we know. I'm a writer because our local library had a story contest for kids. That's not what drew me to the library, but it definitely endeared me and had this lifelong story. So how does it feel to be on the other side? You're making those stories for other people.
It's amazing. The feeling of helping someone find the book that they need in their life at that moment is unlike anything else. And I, as someone who feels a very deep connection to some things that I've read and how it's transformed my perspective on my life and the world around me. Like the idea that I can help people find those stories. It just makes me so happy. So in that way, I feel really lucky in what I do.
Wow. I can go on all afternoon about all of the things that happen in the library, but you don't live in the library. Like you said, your life is loud outside of that. So tell us a little bit about some of the things about your loud life.
Yeah, I mean, I'm interested in so many different things. So I personally, for example, like this past weekend, I really enjoy Bollywood movies and like the experience of watching a film and then enjoying the music and dancing that goes along with it, and like how it makes me want to also sing and dance and move while being part of the cinematic experience. So that's just like a personal interest of mine that I like to blog about and read about, and things like that. So finding those little pieces that really just make you happy and fulfill your life is so important. So that's one of mine.
Wow, thank you for that. I don't know that I've had anyone explain from that emotional space their interest in Bollywood. When I've heard people say that they like Bollywood movies, I've heard it as a curiosity. And to have it resonate, oh yes, I'm curious, but because you get to sing and dance along. I was a kid. I was a musical kid, you know, so that definitely speaks to everything that I have going on. So that piqued a different interest, even though I've heard people be interested in Bollywood. You said something that made me go, oh, that could be a reason I could check that out. We have all of this screen time, you know, of learning and exploring new things. I definitely want to put it on the list. Well, let me ask you this. So we have a line of poetry that I shared with you, and the city clears its throat. So what did that say to you? What did that mean?
Yeah, I had a pretty visceral reaction when I first read it. It felt very physical to me, like I could feel kind of a film in my throat that I wanted to clear or cough out. And it reminded me of an experience I had where I was visiting a city that had quite a bit of air pollution, and I was there for a couple of weeks. And then upon returning, it took me probably about a week to continuously clear my throat and kind of cough as like the soot from the air was coming out of my lungs. And it has stuck with me ever since. And so quite honestly, my first thought with that line is the idea of a city as a living organism and the health of that city impacting individual health. And I thought of that within the context of the climate crisis. Maybe that's because I'm working on a project with the library on climate change and climate change education. But this idea of the city again as a breathing organism, and it's literally clearing its throat, and then how that can impact everyone who lives in that city and our own health and wellness.
Wow. I'm curious, when you took this trip, when you're having this hacking, as you come back, did you have a part of you that was like, oh, you're overreacting, you can't possibly still be, or were you very clear? No, I still have, I don't want to name a city and put it on that. I still have such and such a ville in my chest. So did you come back and question where that was, or that tickle in your throat?
Yeah, it was a pretty clear cause and effect. I knew the city I was in is known kind of across the world as one that suffers from a lot of air pollution. The type to where when you're walking the streets, there's a haze. And so visiting there, being there and studying and breathing the air, I could feel its effect on me. So then when I came back and I was experiencing this, I knew it was connected to what I had been breathing.
Were you active in the conversation about environmental reform and justice and the cleaning of our air and such? Were you active before you had this travel hacking?
I wasn't. No, not at all. Honestly, it wasn't on my mind. It wasn't something I had studied in school. Nothing like that. I would say it hasn't really been something I focused on until I came to Milwaukee, and now I'm learning all about, we have such great environmental organizations here in the city of Milwaukee that are doing really great work around climate change and environmental justice. So now it's something I think about constantly. So it definitely was, I'd say, a turning point for me.
That's and all of us are in that space. I'm thinking back to the timeline of some of us when we were young. It was the collecting newspapers and can drives at school, and you felt like we did our part. Oh, that wasn't it. That wasn't enough. Yeah. And so it's understanding on and on our role in, and I think it's how the role's communicated to us. Sometimes here's what we can do to chip in and save the earth. And then it's here's what you can do because it's your fault that the earth is hurting. And both of those are true. But at some point, it feels like you mentioned these organizations, they got it, or the environmental justice warriors, they got it. I'm just trying to figure out how to get my car out of the driveway. So it's the little things that bring the conversation to everyone's home, to make it personal without also making it feeling apocalyptic. And I don't know if you can get our attention without making us all feel like we're going to die tomorrow. But in the middle is the work and the truth. So it takes these one little moments to all of us to decide the things we're going to cling to. So for you, it's a travel, an awkward return trip.
Yeah.
So what is one thing that you said you've learned that's helping you stay committed to the work? I mean, like if you were to be placed in a whole nother work environment, what will keep you committed to this new attention?
Yeah. So I think a lot about. I don't have my own children, but I have a niece and two nephews, ages 10 and younger. So I'm focused on the world I want to see for them. And that's not just around, issues of social justice and civil rights and healthcare, but it's also around the physical world, our natural world, that I want them to inherit. And so the commitment to environmental justice and climate justice is part of that conversation. And I want them to inherit a world where they feel comfortable also having children that then inherit a world that they can thrive in. Regardless of my profession or a personal experience, I think holding that very tightly is what will drive me. There are also some really amazing books around not just climate change, but how we understand our connection to the natural world that have been pretty transformative and I think really can drive home the importance of viewing ourselves as part of a collective, part of the living structure of our world, and how our smaller actions combined have this ripple effect or help build a web that makes a larger impact, which can help with that anxiety that I think a lot of us feel when we start thinking about, what is actually happening.
Dizzying.
World. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that. We're going to have you come back at the end. I'm going to have our next guest come on, and we're going to compare these notes of what this poem line has done for all of us. And the city cleared its throat. For Kristina, it was a conversation of nature. And we have Miss Wendy Cramer joining us on the small silver celluloid screen. Wendy, how are you?
I am doing well. How about you, Dasha?
I am great. Just everything inside of me is smiling. It's so great to see your face. And especially that we're going to have this conversation, imagination and language. This is going to be great, but we'll get to that part. Part. So tell the people who you are, why I am beaming. Wendy Cramer, who are you? Where are you from? And where are you now?
Well, I'm with Kristina. I was born and raised in Racine. So we have that in common. And of course, I got to know you, Dasha, in Racine when I was working for the Racine Correctional Institution. I was the librarian there, and I had taken note of the fact that so many of the men who came into the library were there for multiple reasons. First, they were there for knowledge. they were there for validation. They were there for socialization. There were so many connections that were made within that library. And in talking with some of the inmates, it became apparent that many of them really wanted to better their lives, and they had no way to express themselves, no way to learn how to go about getting better, how to know who they were and become better people. So I thought about the concept of poetry and how that's the ultimate way to be able to express yourself without judgment of any sort. And because of the population that we were dealing with, and just the way you'd have to jazz things up to get attention and to get a better group of people who were cooperating in the situation, I decided to try slam poetry. So I'd contacted a number of different organizations trying to find someone who could help me with that, because I'm clueless when it comes to poetry. And the name that kept coming up was Dasha Kelly. So I contacted you, of course, and the rest is history. You helped those men to, in many cases, turn their lives around, to get a better understanding of themselves and of other people, and in many, many cases, to be able to express their remorse for the things that they had done and to commit to making their lives better and not reoffending. And you were instrumental in that.
Wow. And thank you for all of those words. And for creating that space. And I remember when we sat, it was a super long coffee, yes. Right? It was, yes. It was initially, and it was a small, it started with a coffee. It started with a conversation. Yes. And was you, myself, and Sandy. We didn't know necessarily where we were going to go with it. It started with, hey, let's come do something with poetry. And that was my introduction to being able to do this type of work. Like, maybe I can go into prison with my poems. And so it started with you making space for those men, and you brought me into that. And then we locked elbows and broadened that space that included the men. I feel that was a huge part of why it's still going on to this day, and why it had such a huge impact, because it wasn't necessarily coming in and this is a package for you to take on. We have all, it wasn't just shoved at them. It was really engaging and meeting them where they were. So I feel that was a huge part of why it was successful. One, it was making poetry not scary. You guys, poetry doesn't have to be scary. And making it all about them. And I know for me personally, that's just the way that I've preferred to teach, that it's less about teaching you these couplets and these poet names and how to, it's giving the tools, like you said, to express yourself. And the process is so rich along the way.
Right. Yeah. Sandy Rickoff and Kathy Rayhart and Dave Michalecki were all instrumental in working with me to get this accomplished. And thank goodness the institution went along with it. When I first approached them about the idea of doing this, they looked at me like I was crazy and, said, have you forgotten where you are? These are guys. What do they care about poetry? And I said, everybody cares about poetry. Everyone has poetry in their heart, in their soul. You just have to get at it. So now,
what about you though? As I recall, it wasn't, so you didn't come to this with, as a scholared poet necessarily, kind of. So what was your relationship to poetry before you, had the guys brought it to you?
I really looked at poetry as therapy, and I knew that the men and the institution did not have the resources to provide therapy for each and every person in the institution. So, my thought was that if someone was able to open that pathway for the men, to let them know that it was okay to put things down on paper, to examine themselves, and to really be critical of themselves, and to look at the world from a new perspective, that it would do more good than any therapeutic session that could be offered by the institution. And
Absolutely.
I have to say that after every program that we had, at least one person would say exactly that. This is the best therapy I have ever had. So
Well, that is
it was a beautiful thing.
absolutely. So what about you similarly outside of that work? We're talking about finding beautiful things that are healing, access to stories and language. Where do you find that?
Right now, I'm on kind of a different journey than I had been on in the past. My passion in the past would have been a more altruistic response. If you were to say, what is your passion? Life changes and circumstances kind of shifted my thinking to a more retrospective mode. So in the past, I would have said my passion involved educating and helping others. Now it's more about learning and helping myself. I think that self-discovery has become very important to me. Finding myself, I know that sounds really 60s, but it's true. But I needed to reconnect with myself at the core. I needed a reaffirmation of my character, my own beliefs, my values. I needed to create a harmony within myself that would enable me to move forward in life and have some sort of impact. I just think that in order to discover and embrace your true life passion and your true life work, you first have to discover and embrace who you are. Like people
So
always
true.
said, you can't love someone until you love yourself. And that's kind of the journey that I'm on right now.
Most excellent. And I appreciate you saying that out loud, because I happen to know personally that you know yourself, love yourself. And so but what's important is the reminder that we get to revisit the things we think we know about us, because even with a great story that we tell ourselves about ourselves, at some point that also becomes a habit. So this idea of staying on a journey, staying on a discovery of self reminds us that it's a constant evolution, that we're never done. So I appreciate you saying that, because a lot of people say, oh no, I did that. That was so 60s. No, do it again. Please do it again. Please do it again. Well, tell us about, what was your take? What do you think this line of poetry is?
Well, the first thing that I thought of when I saw that line was my mother. Whenever my mother saw or heard something that she found either distasteful or inappropriate, she would check that situation by very loudly clearing her throat and giving us the look. Now, it may have been something that we were doing, or perhaps it was something that she was calling our attention to that someone else was doing, so that we understood that you don't treat people like that. You don't talk like that. That's not the way you should live your life. So I immediately thought of that. And my mother has been gone now for 9 years. And I could hear her clearing her throat all summer. And I could hear the cities around our great nation clearing their throats. The cities and the people were faced with the knowledge that we had to come to grip with a very definite racial and ethnic and way of thinking divide. We saw the angst, we saw the denial and all of the trauma that has been manifested by our lack of inclusion in the United States. And as cities experienced protests, we couldn't help but acknowledge that great divide. And I could hear my mother clearing her throat constantly. And the news really reflected and perpetrated that divide, with some placing blaming BLM, blaming QAnon, blaming white supremacists, police, Antifa. The list just went on, and no one was understanding that clearing of the throat to mean that you have to check yourself. And then, of course, came Washington, D.C. And suddenly it wasn't, a crowd of angry people, of angry Black people being forced back by the police. It instead was an angry, horribly angry crowd of white people who were assaulting our Capitol and who were attacking our democracy. And again, I think throughout the nation, the cities cleared their throats and said, this is real. We need to look to ourselves. We need to start dialogues. We need to, pardon the expression, get our shit together.
Oh, so, I'm fully fluent. Absolutely.
That's kind of my take on it.
I appreciate that. And what's interesting in your memory with your mother, and just with that Pavlov, this Pavlovian response to hearing throat clearing, right? So but in that experience, that throat clearing was signaling that you needed to get your shit together, but it also was language for her to, like you said, to draw your attention to what was happening around you.
Right.
So that's interesting, because sometimes that throat clearing is just one directional. It's all about what you need to stop doing across the room.
Yes.
So to your example, I'm hopeful that the cities, as they clear their throats, that there is a reflection, there is an examination in both directions, not just what do we see that's around us, but what is that, what is mama calling my attention to in my own behavior, or my own indifference even. So I'm glad that your mother gave that to you.
Yes.
And I hope that we have, like you said, that some checking, but we have to do more than check at this point. Of course, it's
definitely
taking account of what's happening. You had to correct your behavior. Your mother wanted you to stop doing whatever she was calling your attention to.
Exactly. And to never do the things that other people were doing that she found offensive, or that she was letting us know was not acceptable behavior.
Oh, my. I'm going to ask Kristina to join us, because I love how the two librarians have landed on, taking this poetry line, and both of you have brought us to a conversation about what's possible, about justice, and about considering what's better moving forward. So from environment to social harmony and equity, and the city clears its throat. Not bad. High five. It's almost like we practice it, but we do. So, Kristina and Wendy, glad that you two could meet each other and look what you two have in common.
Yes. We could have Kringle together.
I'll meet you there at O&H.
All right.
So just curious, was there anything that you heard in the other with this take on this poem?
I was very impressed with the whole concept of climate change that Kristina brought to the table. Just to be able to equate something that you hear in a poem to something in your life is what makes poetry so real, and what makes poetry so available to anybody in the world, because there's always some connection that you can make with poetry. So I really enjoyed hearing your climate change situation. And I could picture you being in some California smog-filled city and having to clear your throat, or some, I thought of the coal miners in West Virginia and, living with that coal dust all the time, not being able to drink their water because it was so polluted, and having shortened lives because of the damage it did to your lungs. So I was really intrigued by your parallel there. Thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you, Wendy. I was very taken by your mentioning of the importance of reflections. You mentioned like a personal journey, and there's some reflection happening there. But then also the line of poetry and this broader societal journey that we're on, and how reflection is an essential component of that as well, right? So reflecting on past and current harms that institutions are doing and individuals are doing. And it, for me, made me realize how maybe I talk a lot about reflection, but I maybe don't do it as much as I should, like actually setting the time aside to do it and building it into a practice, whether that be daily or, I don't know what it would look like, but I realize I don't do it. Like I know it's important and I don't. So I think that's really resonating for me and making me think.
Yeah.
You hear that, y'all? We need an app. Somebody make an app for reflection.
There you go.
Bring it to us all. Thank you both for making the time for this conversation. I'm so excited that this initial alignment conversation starts with two librarians, with two women who have been instrumental in me being able to carry forward as a creative change agent, flinging these words around as a way to invite people to be whole. As you said, Wendy, not a lot of people are going to try to hear that or make sense of it. So I appreciate you both believing in me and my words and my commitment to them. So I'm glad that our other Wisconsin residents had a chance to meet both of you and hear your take on our poem for the month, which I should probably get to. So have an incredible world, both of you. And we have had this lovely conversation with Wendy Cramer and Kristina Gomez based on one line of poetry. They don't even know where it came from. And I'm going to share with you the full poem that this line of poetry comes from. It is our poet, Kevin Young. And this is one of his earlier pieces. And I like it. It does a lot of things. So it includes lines of hip hop and it makes references to music at that time, to hip hop artists, and it has a lyricism that does all the things. So I hope you enjoy it too. It's called Beyond Words by Kevin Young. Let's do this. The Mud Club 4th Gallery, Manhattan, April 1981. If you bomb the IND or tag the 2 downtown, gallery bound, dousing it in tribal shrapnel, you're it, the shit. You can lie, but if you can lie between the rails, please stand clear of the closing, or press yourself between the train and the wall, spray can rattling like a tooth. The roof is on fire. Soon the 6 will whistle past, swinging like a nightstick. Officer Pup throwing a brick at that mouse. Ignat's in love. What? Then you'll have found risk. A calling. Crash, daze, prey covering trains like cave paintings, avoiding the German shepherds, Achtung, while the cars sit in the yards. What no one else in this city owns. Making known their names, Dondi, Boy 5, B Cyrus, Crazy Legs, Cooley C, the city clears its throat. The subway shaking the buildings above. We don't need no water, let the motherfucker burn. Futura 2000, Phase 2, Quick and Sex, Cypher, and Lady Pink. Fab 5, Freddie saying everyone's a star. Rapture. The whole planet's in on it. Chili Most being the host coast to coast. Freddie's painted Campbell soup cans that read Dada and Pop instead of beef barley. The UFO has landed and a brother stepping out. Alien dressed all in white. Then there's no more cars. He goes out nights eating up bars. Graffiti, like 3-card Monty, running, avoiding the pigs like a black Muslim bean pie. DJ spinning says pay attention. Say, ain't that Basquiat spinning, disc behind Blondie? 45 stack high like a Dagwood sandwich. Hungry. This B-boy's headed to the top. Yes, yes, y'all, you don't stop. Blowing up. Beyond Words by Kevin Young. This is Alignment. I'm your host, Dasha Kelly Hamilton. I'll see you next month with another line of poetry and 2 more Wisconsin guests, and we'll see what they have to say about